In the beginning, this project was a stool, and it kind of is gone through many phases and end up as a table. But I think everything's there for a purpose, and the material is for a purpose, and all the aesthetics, everything is derived from a way of putting something together. It's very rough, this project. The legs are sun-cast, every leg is slightly different. Tabletop normally use untreated wood, but it's also a nice kind of mix with the actual routing of the slot that the leg fits through has to be very accurate, and it's very kind of detailed and very fine, and I think it's kind of what makes the piece. It makes sense for me to work this way because I produce most of these, or all of these pieces I produced myself in the workshop, and I think it's nice to keep things a little bit rough because it's not a production piece, they're all handmade, and for me there's no sense in making something by hand that looks like it's made by machine in a way. Depending on the project, I'll try and learn a new technique, or try and work with new materials. Making things is an important part of being a designer, and understanding how things are put together, and often that will lead to, especially on the kind of scale or in the area that I work a lot, that kind of means that I produce a lot of the work myself. You kind of keep developing yourself and keep pushing yourself and keep thinking of new ways of designing.
I really actually think it's a joy, it's a real pleasure, and it's kind of like a hobby much more than a work for me. There is a naivety, there is the will to do things without having to completely know them. I know what is a saw and how to use it, and everyone do, so I think if you try that, maybe you might be actually really creative just with one tool. I was studying just next to Hyde Park, and I was really interested in knowing where the wood I was using at the RCA was actually coming from. And at some point I understood that there is this humongous amount of wood that is shipped into the inner city, and that's actually Christmas tree. So in January, when the Christmas is over, you could get this wood for free, and people were just throwing them away. I decided to make small tables and tools as the first kind of output of this project, because I really thought that, of course, I could create street furniture and maybe houses, or small houses for sure, but I was thinking that maybe the project needs to go slowly. You need to start with something and kind of forecast the idea of it, and also forecast the aesthetic of it. I really like the idea of raw craft as the idea of not going always toward perfection. I think it sits in this exhibition, this piece sits in the exhibition in a way that maybe it's not perfect, but there is kind of a cleverness to it, I hope, and there is this kind of simple cleverness to craft techniques that is applied into the making of objects.
It wasn't until I was sort of 15, 16 years old that I really had an idea of what design is. I always loved making things, but I was also very interested in sport, and in many ways actually I think there's a real kind of physicality which actually has crossed over into my work as a designer and as a maker. Usually where my work begins is the origin of the material, or sometimes the origin of the process. It's kind of this marriage, this sort of awareness and understanding of perhaps the local relevance of that material. At the turn of the Industrial Revolution, Cornwall had 3 of the world's largest engine foundries. My pewter stool was very much inspired by the sort of history of the tin mining industry and the foundry industry in Cornwall. I'm not craftsman. I am a designer. And my interests move in and out between different areas, different materials across the entire periodic table. But a lot of the techniques that I use are definitely craft orientated. They're techniques adopted and developed by craftspeople. I like to try and do things myself. I like to be independent. And that's very much in keeping with how a craftsman operates. I like to become very much in tune with the material that I'm working with. I don't want to disguise the material, I don't want to fake a material. It's sort of an honest approach, I like to think.
As a child, I always thought maybe I'm going to be an inventor. My first major was physics, but I just left the school. I like making something, I like creating something, I like drawing. So come up with the job as a designer. I created new material, combining same principle as paper tubing and with wood laminating. So I made a tube. I tried to make the new language made by the tube. Each tube is different, but less than 0.2 or 3 mil diameter. It's nearly exactly the same. But even though I make it all the same, because of the imperfection of hand, it became quite much like a tactile and then just feeling nice. I have some interest in between craft and machine made. Like I really want to combine both. I wanted to put the beauty of like a machine made, even though I do it by my hand. It can be like one shot of sandpaper, but that change is like something finished feeling. It gives some difference, but very tiny, but something invisible.
I think I'd always decided from an early age that I was going to be an architect. I enjoyed making and putting things together, which I miss working on the architecture. A lot of architecture work is spent on the telephone and behind the computer, and it's nice to be able to come and do something a bit more hands-on. The first versions of the trestles I made, I'd asked somebody else to make them for me, but when I went to see them, what had been made, it was embarrassing that I'd completely oversized the timber, I hadn't understood the structure. The next versions I made myself, and in making them I think I came to understand how that material responds to being cut or to being fixed. I think it's only something that I could know through making it. The chair is largely about reviving or reinvigorating the fortunes of a small island which was traditionally a fishing island. But because of the restrictions in cod fishing, most of the occupants were fishermen and now don't have the same livelihood that they used to. This chair is designed to be made on the island. It creates work and it creates skills for the people who are going to make the chair. Part of your work as an architect is to understand how people use things and how they're going to use your buildings. And I've generally made things in the past that are really meant for use. I've generally made things that I've needed and then refined them if they've seemed like worthwhile pieces.
Basically what I do for most of the day is just sweeping. I've worked in some incredible workshops where they've had cleaners every single day and they're immaculate. I'd love that, but it's, the reality is you're always a bit too busy. I've got a lot of collection of just photographs of objects naturally falling into very different types of organised shapes, and I think a lot of my work has kind of reflected that. I do enjoy the way that the world organises itself into more interesting shapes than what a lot of things you see in magazines might show you. The original project I worked on with these split boxes, which use a mathematical principle. If you take a piece of wood and you split it into component pieces, the total of those angles, doesn't matter how you split it, the total of the angles will always make 360 degrees. They're very intentionally very, very crude, very, very rough. They're no more than they have to be. They're very, I'm not a craftsman, I just make things, and that's sort of as far as I need to take it. You can take something, this extremely profound mathematical, geometric principle and apply it to something so humble, and it kind of a certain kind of alchemy happens. Using very, very basic materials, you can create something that kind of releases this profoundness that's beyond the material.
I think you make things in order to achieve a design, but I'm not I'm not making a living of just making things. So I'm not dedicated to full-time making things. Making things is part of the process of designing for me. There are two pieces. Both of them actually, they are small side tables. They're looking at how a table could be used, but also how a table could be easily taken apart. One of them is relying on a cantilevering principle in which a top is being held in place in a post. This pen, if you hold it like that, it stays horizontal. So it's a similar principle to that, but rotated in this direction. Most of the times I kind of have a clear idea of where I want to get. But then at the same time, there is also the unexpected that comes from actually getting your hands in the making process. It's a little bit of improvisation as well. When you are a designer, I think you're always looking at things around you and absorbing things, and then they translate into something. But a lot of times it's very difficult to pinpoint where things are coming from exactly. There's a lot of it that comes from what you feel should work, what feels right. And that's kind of hard to describe. How do you arrive to that point? That's kind of like an intuition.